Hello, this is Michael Hexter, and welcome to Politics 2100 here on YouTube. So this episode I'm calling European Union Climate Activists Must Press European Central Bank to Help Eurozone Governments Finance Emission Cutting. So the situation in Europe is unique or in the world in that we have 20 governments that use the same currency, and that currency is controlled by the European Central Bank. And the primary focus of the European Central Bank over its 20-plus year history has been to control inflation and as well, to issue the euro and control inflation through a variety of means, and including imposing grinding austerity on certain nations in the EU that run trade deficits with other EU nations. And so the Eurozone is constructed in ways that, if you just even leaving climate change out of the picture, that are self-destructive and also just do not acknowledge the reality of trade and of money. It's based on a fantasy about how money works. A fantasy that operates fairly well, but then breaks down in crises and also in or also when you have predatory policy by stronger economic actors, notably Germany, and to some degree other Northern European nations, as they attempt to build on their existing advantages and power over other European nations like Spain, Italy, and Greece, most notably. But anyway, that situation is something that it takes a little while to understand. And some people, suggest, well, the Eurozone should break up. And there is another alternative, which is the European Central Bank needs some kind of reform, and it needs to become there needs to be sort of more centralized and democratic control of the central bank, and the rules that it imposes on member governments need to be, in certain areas, loosened or changed, or its mandate needs to be changed in part. And this is actually something Christine Lagarde, who's the current ECB head since 2019, has actually an interest in climate change, and she wants to, at least she said, she's said that she's concerned about it. But I am of the opinion that any government addressing climate change full on and as an emergency needs to have the ability to run deficits above the level of the rules that the Eurozone allows, sometimes as much as 5 or 10% or more, with the idea that it's not just for the purpose of spending money, willy-nilly, but for the very specific purpose of outfitting, in this case, Europe or any country, transforming its economy to one where it basically becomes a circular economy over time. So I think the superordinate goal of, if there were planning done about how the Eurozone should evolve, or for that matter any government, any region of the world today, it should be evolving toward circularity, and meaning that the material inputs and outputs are balanced in the sense, and there's no net basically pollution ejected into the biosphere. And furthermore, some countries who are currently taking in too much material literally should be economizing and not and being more abstemious in their use of the resources of the world. And so anyway, but this is so overall circularity in the way gets us to net zero, or now I'm sorry, net zero is a controversial word because it's used as a dodge. But to get basically we emit carbon dioxide, or the animals that we have as pets or we keep also emit carbon dioxide. So in a way, there is always going to be an issue of net absorption by the biosphere of our emissions. But anyway, we certainly want to reduce fossil emissions to zero, and also do various operations to enhance the ability of the natural world to absorb the current surplus of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. But anyway, beside this goal, this is something that I think there should be a movement to, if the Eurozone is to remain viable, and I've part of a movement, or in economics, the modern monetary theory school, that has been very, very critical of the way the Eurozone has been put together and so forth and so on. And there are some members who have said it should be broken up, or that might be one option. I have witnessed the drive to join the Eurozone as being something that it's hard for small economies to stand alone outside the Eurozone, and they often become absorbed in it, and they want to be a part of it, even if often with negative consequences for their economies, especially if they're one of the weaker economies in the Eurozone. So it can be it can be the wrong decision for some countries, and also, anyway, what I'm saying though is the rules needs to be democratized. There needs to be a European-wide, in this case, I'm proposing there needs to be a European-wide budget for a Europe-wide Green New Deal, and that and a serious Green New Deal, a full Green New Deal, not a window dressing Green New Deal, one that has metrics to cut emissions, could cut greenhouse gas emissions as the leading edge of creating the circular economy. So even if theoretically one would only cut fossil emissions, but still be wasteful with material resources, with physical, or let's say solid and liquid resources, not gaseous resources, one could still be net, in terms of not creating this circularity in the economy. But I think it's the best route forward toward zero emissions is also to be building circularity in material flows in the economy, like in the building sector, in consumer goods, so forth and so on. And anyway, so this movement of the Eurozone, or any country. So I'm just using the Eurozone as an example of, it could be any single country. It could be, the African Union. It could be any number of different groups of nations or single nations that decide to undertake a massive project of changing the way they use energy. And it's actually more massive in the countries that are already the high emitting countries, the ones that are quote unquote that are the richer countries in terms of their, the dollar or the euro or whatever measure you want to make of an economy, that they have this higher and they have it, and also materially through their domination often of poorer countries. They have, as well as whatever resources they have domestically. They also have materially more comfortable lives, at least certainly the top 10, 15, 20% of their societies, if not even the top 50, 60, 70%, or 90% even, rather as compared to the rest of the world. So anyway, so there needs to be a movement globally toward changing the physical infrastructure of societies so they can be net zero emitting or zero carbon dioxide, fossil carbon dioxide, and fossil greenhouse gas emitting from non-biological entities, like, from like by machines and so forth and so on, or manure lagoons or what have you. The technical infrastructure and the devices that people use, now, which now are often very high emitting relative to the work they do in terms of using various fossil fuels. So anyway, that movement will often require large public investments in certain kinds of infrastructure, and also programs that will allow consumers to, for instance, give up their electric or their gas powered, their vehicles of various kinds for electric ones, and also to allow wherever they live for those to be charged, and then also connect charge infrastructure or that electrical infrastructure that would be requiring more energy transported via electricity from renewable energy generators to the places where it's needed. So, and all of that requires some doing, and the more the material that's involved in doing that comes from renewable resources like plants and so forth and so on, the better, because there are certain limitations in terms of minerals that we have, and so we want to make that the infrastructure that we have, for instance, the towers that wind turbines are set upon, potentially could be made from a certain kind of engineered, a strong, very ultra strong wood or so forth and so on, and the blades, so forth and so on, and that is a process that needs to be developed, and that requires innovation. It requires public investment and the cooperation between governments and also private entities that are working on those particular problem sets. So there's a huge need there could be a European Fund for Innovation in the area of climate, all those kind of things, and it needs to happen on a wartime footing, on a very rapid. It is not something just sort of casually sit back and just sort of think about it as an incremental process, and it needs to happen very quickly. Obviously, some things are best not rushed, but the more things that can be done very quickly, and the better. Okay, and the more things that are rapid, like for instance, creating a bikeable city can happen within a year or less in most places. Bikeable meaning safe for bicyclists and pedestrians and so forth and so on, and building. There are other things that would require, a period of years to do. So all of those things need money, and the Eurozone countries are very constrained by the budgetary rules of the EU, which limit annual deficits by the governments in it, and also this this has had a lot of negative social effects. So and for even Germany, who supposedly is one of the beneficiaries of the Eurozone, but actually the population of Germany on average has seen a decrease in their overall welfare, and there is a lot of discontent in Germany, even though, and they treat the sort of the way the political discourse has been structured is they treat it as an inevitability. And I think that understanding money and currencies and as modern monetary theory allows one to do, one can then think about how the Eurozone and also the European Central Bank would need to be reformed to effectively allow governments to act on climate. So and really do very to mobilize resources to address the crisis. And so I don't hear from climate. I'm going to talk in another video about a very specific issue I have with the Italian Ultima Generazione and their proposal for what they are for. But I am all of the Euro. I have not heard from any of the radical climate activists that I think are doing great work in pressing forward and being very heroic and very and calling attention to the climate crisis and the fact that governments are at least pro fossil fuels. So cutting fossil fuel subsidies is pretty common as a demand. So there are things that are obviously they're definitely on a good path for that, but I think they need to be more explicit about what the direction is, not just simply that they're trying to squeeze blood from a stone, in the sense of that where the governments are committed to a form of austerity or a form of very limited mobilization of resources, public resources. And it's partly a class war that has occurred through the Eurozone, a war against generous social democracy. Social democracy still exists in Europe. I'm not talking about the political movement that calls itself social democracy, but the system. There are many quote unquote conservative parties in the Eurozone that still support what I would call a social democratic system of different kinds, but there is a movement, especially among the libertarian or the business parties in that, like for instance the German FDP, that who consider themselves to be the speakers of the truth or whatever, and they're partly, as in my last video, they're the sort of fanatical believers in or actually a couple of videos also recently, believers in a sort of Hayekian vision of how economies work, or this, as like I recently was talking about, this sort of misreading or the mangling of Adam Smith, and there also is a particular German concern about inflation, remembering the Weimar Republic, but misremembering the rise of fascism as a product of hyperinflation, which happened in the 1920s, rather than the deflation or the austerity that happened in the early 30s after the collapse of the stock markets around the world, especially the U.S., but that triggered the Great Depression in many parts of the world, including in Germany. But the German ethos about money, but not all Germans. There are Germans who are proponents of modern monetary theory, and they understand the errors of this dominant German, and also in other countries. So this has been seeded around the euro and the Eurozone, and it's also embedded in many of the rules of of the euro. But anyway, the effort to actually act decisively on climate and to create a compelling vision. There's a political gain to it. It's not just being a smart ass about economics and money and so forth and so on, and about the flaws of the Eurozone and being, sharp about that. But it's about creating a compelling vision and a propulsive vision for society. The people standing around, let's say climate activists, and saying, we can make this city or this country green and stabilize the climate and stop polluting the world, and destroying creation, so forth and so on. Any of the number of the different, and becoming very specific about what we could do with monies that are created public good. And this is also there is a role for taxes on the very wealthy, or on corporations, especially on activities of corporations that are destructive and polluting and warming, and spreading warming. So, but that money, again, this is a teaching of modern monetary theory, is that the exact amount of what is spent by governments, and also in this case by a unified Eurozone, isn't financed directly one for one by the tax dollars that are collected, even. And with the compelling vision, or the compelling, I'm sorry, I'm being too high when I say compelling vision, the fixed idea that people have, and the desire they have to punish the wicked by taxing them, and they combine that with the need for money to spend. There's you can still punish the wicked, but you don't need their money to spend. So there are two different legs to this. In other words, you need to create a just tax system and a environmentally friendly tax system, but you also need to inject liquidity via money creation. Okay, that's how governments spend, even in the Eurozone, by money creation via spending, and you need to inject those monies in the right places via the right policies. So there's some, of these climate movements that might not want to get into the specifics of what they're really for. They might split the movement because saying, well, I'm really not for that, I'm for this. So I think, though, it helps to, I think there's probably a general consensus that they want to see, better and cheaper train service that's all electric, and public transit that's electric, and buses that are electric, and bike infrastructure, and scooters that are electric, and more renewable energy. So there's a vast area within the movement of agreement about where. And then figuring out where those money, whether that's a public expenditure, whether it's something that it can be done through markets, so forth and so on, or through government policy that shapes markets, so to speak. But all of that, I think there needs to be this injection of what I would consider to be hope and vision of what needs to be done and how it can be done quickly, which it can be done quickly, and it doesn't, again, requiring penny anteing. I'm sorry to use that slang word, but penny pinching by trying to find the money, in via taxation. So anyway, so I think this is an area of opportunity for these movements that are growing in many European countries that are doing great work and brave work to expand their vision. And many of them are younger people and so forth and so on. They may not trust this sense of hope and vision and so forth and so on, because they've grown up within the euro, many of them, so forth and so on. They don't, there's certain assumptions that they've grown up with. But anyway, I think that this effort is something that it needs to be. There needs to be strong demands made of the European Parliament, which theoretically regulates the European Central Bank, and also, but there needs to be very specific requests or demands that the Eurozone, or the EZ Bank, the European Central Bank, ECB, has a finance. It's not a fund per se. I mean, fund sounds like it's a static amount of money. Basically, has a budget for governments to draw from, or governments are allowed to budget a certain amount, whatever it is, maybe some percentage related to their population, so forth and so on. And actually, to put a limit on it is even this is such essential work, because it has public value beyond the national borders of any community. So it's really, they're doing a government that decides to say, I'm going to spend 500 billion euros this year on X, Y, and Z, and they have a plan. They can show that they can do it. In other words, it's not just, I'm just sort of asking for money without having a plan for it, but actually having a plan and saying, we need this, we need to do this, this, and this. I'm throwing out that number to say whatever money they're spending that actually goes into emissions cutting activities, so things that we know will cut emissions, for instance, discounted rail tickets, okay, on electric trains, all these things that are just obvious. There are certain disincentive crazily, the way the price structure of transit is that it often incentivizes the use of transit frequently. I mean, it depends on which country you're in, and also the scheduling of trains and all that good stuff. So much of this is, it's not nearly 500 billion euros in any given year. It's much, much less. But there still needs to be no doubt that because of this cause, the money is there. And so the money has to be there to do even the minor bureaucratic changes, or to fund the operations of the railway if it operates, instead of 5 trains, 8 trains an hour or something on a certain route, or just makes them prices things until the trains are full and then adds the trains. But anyway, that requires money to run the trains and so forth and so on. And not, enormous sums, but it requires money. And so anyway, but all that has good that redounds to everybody, not only in Europe, but in the world. So I think that there's a lot of quote unquote low-hanging fruit in that zone, which could be cut. But I don't think penny pinching, if one has a realistic plan to cut it, or also this innovation fund that needs to happen to I think discover renewable materials from plants and so forth and so on, and seaweed that replace high emissions products and so forth and so on, or highly polluting products or toxic products, should be a no-brainer. As again, one needs to be judicious. One needs to find bankers, so to speak, or people who review the proposals of where the money is going to go that will cut emissions. And so there needs to be sort of an environmental review committee and a technical review committee for these proposals. But in any case, that is so it's not just throwing money and putting it in a budget and saying, yeah, we've done it. There needs to be, so it's not vaporous, okay, in terms of what it will do. But these are, again, there are so many concrete ways that one could do this quickly, and it's a matter of just creating proposals and compiling a series of green proposals and saying, we got to fund these, European Central Bank. What are you going to, start funding them? Okay. And so anyway, so I think this is a positive route forward for the numerous radical climate movements that are currently growing or already large within the Eurozone. And also the same logic can be applied to the United States, can be applied to Great Britain that doesn't have the euro. So anyway, I'm just putting this forward. I will do another video soon about the particular issue or particular national activist groups and what I might propose that, obviously out of, from a distance to some degree, but anyway, but that based on this insight or these insights about money and the limitations of money and the deployment of money for public good. So anyway, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and please like the video if you found any of it interesting, and please subscribe to Politics 2100, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.